reading standards in terms of advising teachers about how to work in the classroom with them. We're going to then look at our CASAS reading content standards in the new reading test series. This is not in depth, but just to give you an overview of what's going on. There is a handout on resources and acronyms, which we already sent you. And then in the end, if we get time, we'll talk about some questions from the field and any questions that you have. So that's what we're about. We can go to the next slide. So here, this is basically the crux of what we're focusing in on is OCTE, which is the new OVE, that is the Office of Career and Technical Adult Education, the Federal Department of Ed. Asked for a report which was actually published about now more than a year ago, which is called College and Career Readiness, CCR, for Adult Education. The author of this is someone that you may already know of. Excuse me, Susan Pimentel was one of the authors actually of the ELA, English and Language Arts Standards for the K through 12 Common Core Standards, and she worked on it for adult ed as well. So, actually the College and Career Readiness, the CCR standards, are part of they're really the structure for the K-12 Common Core Standards. And they were, the first things that were created really for Common Core, because that was the impetus for all of it, is to get students into college or post-secondary and career and have them ready. And the CCR for Adult Ed study was based on these same CCR standards that are in the K-12 system. Next slide, please. So you may be wondering, what about ESL learners? Because one of the things about the CCR for Adult Ed study was that it only focused on ABE and adult secondary learners. So what so far we've heard from OCTE is that they are not planning a similar study for adult ESL. So we really have to work with this document and adapt and infer as we can for adult ESL. So I guess they felt that the ABE and ASE was perhaps more of a priority, or maybe needed it more. I don't know. But in fact, I think you'll see we've been working with the reading standards pretty effectively for adult ESL. Okay, let's go ahead. Now, the leveling in this study is a little bit of you need to understand how they've worked. One of the, I think, great contributions was that they did bundle the grade levels into 5 levels, which they called A, B, C, D, and E, and of course, CASAS also uses. So there is a chart, which we're going to look at in a second, but I just want to show you that there's the CCR level A is equivalent to CASAS A. Their B is our low B. Their C is our high B. So that's one difference. Their C is only our high B. Their D is our C, and their E is our D and E. So if we go to the next slide, we have this on a chart that we also sent you. And that shows, starting from the left on the ESL, you can see the CASAS level, AE, and our CASAS ESL level name. Then it relates to the NRS levels, which is 1 to 6, up to advanced ESL. Then the NRS level names. Then our CASAS scale score ranges for reading. Then the CCR adult ed, the grade levels that the CCR used, and their A, B, C, D, E. So you can see that their A is the same as ours, but where it's, as I was just saying, the B is just our low B, and their C is our high B, etc. So, and then you can see the same thing on the ABE side, where it doesn't match exactly, but that is how it relates. So this is not an official chart, but this is something that we drew up in order to help people understand how it all fits together. So hopefully it will be helpful to you. Okay, I'm not able to see the chat. Is anybody asking questions here? Okay. If you do have a question, just enter it in the chat box, and I'll try to keep an eye on it. All right, so in the CCR for Adult Ed, just as in the K-12 system, There are, for the English and Language Arts, ELA, there are 4 strands: reading, and you know that there is this other, it's not exactly a strand, but they're really important standards for the reading foundational skills, and we'll look at those in a second. So there's reading, writing, combined speaking and listening, and then language. And what they were trying to do was to create an integrated model of literacy so that it's not teaching discrete skills like only reading, but teach it with writing or teach it with speaking. And then to, in terms of media requirements like digital literacy and that kind of thing, is integrated also throughout. So let's go to the next slide. Well, actually, before we go there, I do want you to take a look. Oh no, all right, sorry. Let's go to the shifts, and then we'll go take a look. All right, so there are 3 shifts, and you know, if you've been paying attention to this, you've probably heard these in one way or another. And this is Susan Pimentel from Student Achievement Partners, as I said earlier, is one of the authors. She has explained that it's, although each standard is interesting and needs to be understood on its own, but these are some kind of overriding themes and shifts in how the Common Core is different from what a lot of us were doing before. One is to do with complexity, so and that is the complexity of the text. So it's academic language, it's dense, it's got a lot of difficult words, it's not simplified. And one of the themes in the Common Core and the CCR is that we should really let students deal with and wrestle with complex text, because that's what they're going to be facing, and it doesn't help to only give them simplified text, which is apparently, you know, what has been happening quite a bit. The second shift is about evidence. So again, it's really focusing in on the text and asking students to, in whatever modality they're working, to keep going back to the text, or if it's speaking to the discourse, to get evidence from the text, not so much to ask their own opinion about something, although, you know, it's not a complete no-no, but basically in the Common Core philosophy, it's to really focus in on the text and have students understand the text. So you're reading the text. You're not so much giving your opinion. Then as far as knowledge is concerned, one of the things that they noted from research was that a lot of students, and this is very true of especially ABE learners and ASE learners, is that they are lacking in their basic content knowledge. And so the focus on the CCR is in informational text as opposed to literary text. So that, especially in K-12, is a big change. For adult ed, not so much, but we've been using informational text, or sometimes it's called literary nonfiction. The idea is to, you know, there's a lot of potential in that kind of text. It doesn't have to be dry or boring. It can be very content rich, but the idea is to focus in, rather than on literature, more on informational text. Okay, let's go to the next one. So now we want to have you look at the reading standards themselves. So if you could take a look at that handout that was sent to you, which was the excerpt of Chapter 4. And so if you have that in your hands or on your screen, that would be good. And what I want you to do is, the first section is reading. And go ahead and turn to the first page where it gives a key to some of the abbreviations. But then if you would go to page 14, or, oh, it says 15, but I think it's actually, well, 14. 14 is where it begins, and then 15 is the second standard. And we're going to look at that. If we look at the next slide, just to make sure we're all on the same page. Let's go there, and we can see what it looks like. So the first thing at the very top is what's called the anchor standard statement. So where it says CCR Anchor 2, determine central ideas or themes of a text, and analyze their development, summarize the key supporting details and ideas. So that's the overall anchor statement. But what's very important is these level descriptors. So you can see here, we just had A, B, C, D, but there's also E if you see on the handout. And this is where it gets broken down by level. So although the anchor standard talks about sort of a broader and more complex set of objectives, the level A, you can see, is quite simple. It's just identify the main topic and retell key details of a text, for example. So it's important to get down to these level descriptors, because that's where teachers will actually implement according to the level that they're working on. And if you see on the handout, sometimes there are what they call applications of these standards, like at levels D and E, where they put in the context of science and technology or some other thing that they felt was important for adults. So part of what the result of the study was to pull out certain aspects of applying these standards in certain contexts that they felt were important for adults. And so if you just want to go through, you'll see that there are actually 10 reading anchor standards. And we're going to look at them in a minute in a little more detail. Then there are also writing standards. So you can see they also go A through E. Some of them don't have a level A because they felt that that was, the level A's couldn't handle some of the writing standards. But they are quite detailed. There are not as many writing standards. There are, I think, 9. Then there are speaking and listening standards. So these, it's interesting for those of us in ESL that these are, the speaking and listening standards start on page 29. They are meant to be for ABE and ASE as well as ESL. And so they look at the kinds of things that adults need to do in terms of speaking and listening, whether they're native speakers or not. And then the language standards start on page 33. These, if you look at these, the first one, the anchor one, is about conventions of standard English grammar and usage. The second one is, and it goes on quite a bit. It starts on page 33, goes to page 34. On 35, you'll see the capitalization, punctuation, and spelling standards. It's anchor 2. Then anchor 3 in this area has to do with language functions, how it functions in different contexts. Anchor 4 is the unknown and multiple meaning words, so it focuses in on vocabulary. And 5 is figurative language, word relationships, and word meaning. So I'm wanting you to see these because we don't always focus on these so much, especially in ESL, but they really are here and part of what is included in the CCR for adult ed. But the anchor 6 there for language is on the academic language. And then the last one is the foundation skills for reading. And that starts, if you look on page 40, are the keys, and then 41. And, you know, I think it's important to see these because sometimes people say, well, the CCR for adult ed doesn't go low enough. But if you look here, you'll see that it really does, in great detail, lay out all of the objectives for literacy level students, the coding and phonemes, etc. So it's really very, very detailed. And is actually very useful, I think, for our adult setting. Okay, so that's just a whiz through the standards just to get you comfortable with what's there and familiar a little bit. So now we have a little activity we're going to do part of. We're going to look back at Standard 2 in reading, which is, I believe it's on page 15, if you want to go back there in your handout. And again, you can see the descriptor there. I won't read it again, but you can read it. Okay. So now what this activity is to just take on a piece of paper or write on your handout, what would be a 2 or 3 word way to summarize this standard, or to name it in a short descriptor. So just take a minute and read the descriptor for the whole standard, for all the levels, and just write down what you think would be a short way in a few words to describe this.
And we're going to give you an example of this, and then move on to some other ones.
Thank you. Yes, Lori. This first
you
one
want
is
me to give the example?
Yes, please. So, all right. So here's for this standard 2. A short name for this one is main idea and summarize. So this is the idea of this activity, is to just come up with a few words. And this can really help you to kind of own the standards and feel like you can get your arms around them, because these standard descriptors are kind of wordy, but just to get the essence is, in this case, main idea and summarize. Okay, so now there's 3 more. Now we want you to actually do it. These 3 standards, a minute, and read the standard for 6, 8, and 10 for reading, and just write a few words of the short name for the standard. Just take a couple minutes right now to do that. Okay. So would anyone like to type in what they put for the short name for Reading Anchor 6 in the chat box? Maybe somebody else could put what they wrote for Standard 8, and another person could do Standard 10? Or if nobody wants to do that, we can just show you what we did. All right, so here, the first one for Anchor 6, the short form of this is simply the author's point of view. Now, I mean, these are not set in stone. This is one way to summarize it, but something to that effect is what this one's about in general. The Reading Standard 8, we can show you what we put is evaluate arguments. There's the idea of evaluating, and also the idea of that there are arguments involved. So there's some analysis of arguments and reasoning. And Casey, you're saying that yours may be a little longer, but if they help you, that's fine. You know, the idea here is to be helpful and get your arms around them. Okay, and the Reading Standard 10, go ahead. Well, this one is a little different, and it has to do really with text complexity and also fluency, reading fluency. Okay, so we're just doing 3 of these, but you can go ahead and complete this on your own. We found that it's really a way that people can begin to own the standards. And it's an activity I want to give credit to Susan Pimentel, who does this in her workshops as well. Okay, so hopefully that was helpful for you. Let's go on.
Great.
So now I'm going to turn over to Mary.
Sorry, I interrupted you. Thank you for turning it over to me, Linda. So now that you've had a chance to look at the anchor standards, we want to help you look a little bit more deeply at the level-specific standards, they're called, as Linda described earlier, what's in the A, B, C, and D section of the standards. And Sylvia Ramirez and I, Sylvia Ramirez from Mira Costa College in San Diego area, and I worked on a way of helping teachers and staff members look at the standards a little bit more specifically and try to relate them to classroom instruction. So what we had teachers do is follow these instructions for analyzing the standards and their instructional materials. So even before agencies were able to write standards for their own agencies related to the Common Core or college and career readiness standards, that teachers could just go in there sort of down and dirty, analyze their instruction materials, and see whether they met the standards or not, and if they didn't, supplement them. So we suggested these 3 steps, and we're going to go through them one at a time. The first step being read the standard, then read the level-specific standard, and then unpack the level-specific standard. So I'm going to show you how we did that. So you have the standard up at the top, determine central ideas or themes of a text, and then we're going to be working with the A level-specific standard, what we say is beginning lit, low beginning, or high beginning students. So what we ask in terms of unpacking the standard is to identify the key elements of the standard. In this case, we think there are 2 key elements. 1, identify the main topic, and 2, retell the key details. We ask teachers to underline the key element and number them as a way of keeping track of whether they show up in any instructional material. So that's the first step, unpacking the level-specific standard. The second step is then to review the published materials and identify activities in the published materials that meet the level-specific standard. So we're going to be looking for 2 items in this case. So for example, we have this material that happens to be from Venture 2nd edition, one of Sylvia Ramirez's publications. And the first element is identify the main idea. Where the red arrows are, you can see that the title of this small reading, what are your future goals, what steps do you need to take, as well as what they call the reading tip over on the right, first read quickly to get the main idea, both focus on the key element of identifying the main idea. So we gave a chart with the level-specific standard up at the top, the 2 areas, and then you can see below where we're asking the teacher to fill in the chart and put number 1, identify the main topic, and write which activity, if any, meets this part of the standard. In this case, as I showed you before, exercise 2, the title of the reading and the reading tip both work on the main idea. You didn't see it in the materials I showed you, but there is a section called exercise 3A and 3B actually address the second element, retell key details. So this text does meet the standard in some way. The third element of the instructions is to develop supplementary activities for elements of the level-specific standard that are not met by the published materials or that need to be enhanced. So in looking at the material we just saw, we decided that although the title and that little reading tip did focus the students' attention on the main idea, it would be better for the teacher to enhance it a little bit by For example, the first bullet, students calling out the main topic of the paragraph with the teacher writing it on the board, or the teacher asking the question, where did you find the main idea? So in this case, we have a little chart about the supplementary activities and asking teachers to identify what supplementary activities they would use. I hope you've noticed that it's very simple in terms of not having to prepare a lot of materials, but perhaps adding a question or focusing the student's attention on something. It doesn't take a lot to see if the materials have the standard activities and if they need to be supplemented. If you would like to go into more depth in a training like this, on the resource page in the second to the last slide, I put the resource for a training that Sylvia and I did that would allow you to go more in depth with unpacking the standards and following these steps to look for instructional materials in the text or developing supplementary materials. Linda?
Okay. So I'm going to go a little quickly through the next slides because we lost some time, as you know. But this next slide talks a little bit, this is from Andy Nash from World Education, and thinking about what do we have to think about for English language learners because they have varied educational backgrounds, different kinds of exposure to academic language and text. Some of them are engineers, doctors, and college professors, and others have limited literacy skills. So there's quite a range, and we have to consider that. There are different, some academic practices are culture specific, so that's something that we need to adjust for, which we anyway always have to do in our ESL practice. But when we're getting more into the academic language and some of the standards call for more of that. And in this also, academic discourse uses metalinguistic terms, so these may be some things that English language learners as well as native speakers may need to learn, but in particular. And then English language learners have diverse goals. So you may think of other things, but these are just some of the things to consider that when we're addressing English language learners with the standards. So let's go to the next slide. Also, in terms of sort of generally implications for instruction and assessment, whereas before we've been focusing on reading skills, the adjustment here is that we're really focusing in on the complexity of what the students can read and making sure that we introduce text that is complex enough, not terribly complex, but that they can work with, and the kind of scaffolding that's required, is certainly part of how we have to help them. It's not that we're not going to give them some support to get to the complex text, but we do have to get all the way there to the complex text. The next one is an accent on literary terminology. So here we, instead of that, we're focusing more on academic vocabulary and not as much on literary, which we haven't been in adult ed anyway, but this is really emphasizing that. Again, in K-12, it was mainly literature, and now it's across disciplines using informational text. And then in terms of writing, what we've been doing quite a bit is decontextualized prompts and asking people, students their opinion, write about their background, which again you can do some of, but the emphasis in the CCR is to write based on something that's been read, an informational text that's complex, and then to write based on that or on something that's been heard. So these are the adjustments into the Common Core. Okay, next slide. Let's get a little bit into what CASAS has been doing about all this. In 2010, when the K-12 standards came out, we took a look at our reading and math standards, and we tried to see to what extent they were aligned to the Common Core K-12 standards, and we saw a strong alignment. Then when the new study came out in April of 2013, we went ahead and looked at that in terms of our standards, and again we found a strong alignment for math and reading. And in terms of, just to mention briefly, that the National External Diploma Program, NEDP, the Common Core standards came out at a time when we were still fine-tuning and developing those competencies, so we were able to very strongly align them with the Common Core. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Now, even beyond that initial alignment, in the past few months, we've been working more on our CASAS reading content standards. And to revise them, it's really going to be a new version by the time we're done with it, and we're going to be doing a webinar on that as soon as we're done, which hopefully is in a month or so. Here's what we've done, and we're still doing. We looked at the CCR for Adult Ed, and we thought that there were some standards in there that we really had not covered completely, or perhaps in some cases at all, in our reading content standards, so we've added some. We've really done a major reorganization and renaming of our reading content standards so that they relate more clearly. Well, actually, it makes to just make them more intuitive and easier to use, and so they also do relate more in terms of the way they organize to the CCR standards. And one thing I'm very excited about is that in our revised reading content standards, you'll really be able to see where the CASAS task areas for reading fit in. They're called out in there in one of the sections. So, you know, the task areas are forms and charts and tables or narratives. They're labeled 1 to 5. So those are very clearly noted now in our reading content standards. We had a very long section of literature-related standards, which we didn't really mean at all to indicate the importance of those standards, but just we put a lot of them in there. But in the revised version, we have cut them down and synthesized a lot of those, so there's fewer of them. And we've done some more combining and streamlining to, I think the current document is only about 7 pages as opposed to about 14. So it's really very much of a, I think, easier document to work with. And of course, we've had some input from the field, from all of you, and from our own, whenever we're doing test development work, we always notice things that we want to fix and change. So well, we're going to be coming out with a new version soon, and we're very eager to share that with you. So if we go to the next slide, we did some work at the Summer Institute with the focus group. That should have been in the past tense. That happened in June. And so we got some great input, and also some input on our priorities in terms of competency areas and task areas for the new reading series from those focus groups at the Summer Institute. As I said, these revised reading content standards will be finished later this summer, and we will present a webinar to go over those with you. Okay, let me quickly go on to the next slide, which is our new CASAS assessment series. As you may know, hopefully you do know by now, we are working on 2 new series, a reading and a math series for ESL and the ABE-ASE. They will be aligned to the Common Core and to the CCR for Adult Ed. That's really we're anchoring it now to the CCR for Adult Ed. And compared to the current Life and Work series for reading or the Life Skills series for math, there will be more focus on academic skills, especially at the higher levels. There will be some evidence of those kinds of skills at level B, not so much at A, but we are backing it down to B. And so trying to include more academic language and more academic reading and math, so to better assess whether students are ready to transition to post-secondary and careers. So, but we just to reassure you, our CASAS competencies are still going to be centrally there, because we will be measuring these academic skills still in adult context. You know, it's going to still be academic focused, but yet in the context that are relevant for adult learners. So it's a challenge. We're we're trying to, if you have any ideas, we're still writing some items for the series. So if you have suggestions about contexts that you think would be good to include in the new series, we'd really love to hear those. Things that you're teaching or you're finding that you have to include in instruction that you might not have included before, we'd really like to hear about, and you could email me for that, ltaylor@casas.org. So another decision we made, we were originally going to go with only an online version, but based on the field's availability, not availability, but based on the field's access to hardware and computer delivery, we realized that it was still premature for adult ed to require that, and so we will be doing paper versions of these assessments. We have begun our field testing, and that's going on right now. We're doing it in a way that it's embedded in the e-test online in the operational form. So if you're using the Life and Work reading, you will see 2 or 3 field test items in there that students are taking, and those items are not scored, but we're using that to get our field test data. So far that's working really well. But I will mention that we are going to probably be coming out to you. We're going to have to do some in-tech in the fall. Again, we're going to try to do that on eTest online if we can. So let me just see, are there any questions? I did go through that very fast. And if you do have any questions or comments, just please type them in. Lori, do you want to cover the resources? She may be muted, so maybe I'll go ahead. You should have received a 2-page list of resources that we, Barb Lehman and I, updated for the Summer Institute this year, but there's now more and more out there. So, but one of the, that set of resources has some really nice links to teacher videos. I think that's very powerful, and that's something we did at our Summer Institute session. We didn't have time for it today, but we are actually thinking that we might do a follow-up session to this webinar that would be more hands-on. We showed a 10-minute demonstration by a teacher, and it's always so interesting to see teachers using these CCR for adult ed standards in instruction. It really, I think, helps to understand how to apply them.
Linda, this is Lori. Sorry, I was muted before, and I just want to add that one thing that's great about the videos is that you can search for Common Core and go through their list of things that are related to the Common Core. And even though they're not in adult education, because the standards are moving towards academic, I find them much more applicable than I might have in the past for adults as well. So I think they're very useful.
Definitely. In fact, after we had sent out the resources document to you on the links discussion, someone was recommending some teacher videos that, so I'll add those to the next version. And if you come across any, please let us know. Lori, do you want to mention about the webinar that's here on the second bullet?
Yes. So I added, the slides that I showed you about unpacking the standards and those 3 steps, we did in a CalPro webinar. CalPro is our professional development leadership project here in California, but anyone can access them. So I gave you the link to it. There were some technical difficulties in that training, but hopefully if you wanted you or your teachers to look at it, might be helpful to you if you want to go further in that. And we just got a note from, I think, Susan, that that one of our resources isn't working or isn't linking to the correct thing. So we will look into that and try to get you that link if it's still available. And thank you, Adriana. Adriana's going to take care of that.
Yeah, and if anybody else has any suggestions, then we can create a new version of these resources and get it out to and add things that people have found. So hopefully it would be nice if this can be a collective compilation.
I was going to say we just have 2 more minutes. We could maybe go ask for questions or go over some of these, Linda.
Mm-hmm. So this last slide just is kind of some of the voices from the field that we've heard about the CCR for adult ed standards. So some, for example, I'm already covering these. Am I missing something? Well, if you're already doing it, great. That can be. And maybe you are already on board and sort of were clairvoyant about all this. About the lower levels, hopefully what Lori showed you will give some insights into how to deal with that in terms of published materials. But definitely you can see if you look at the levels A and B in the standards, those descriptors, and especially the reading foundation skills, they're not only for advanced learners, they're really also for lower levels. We talked about ESL, and then there are some standards that we found that are not on the CCR that you will find in our CASAS reading content standards. So that's one of the valuable contributions I think that our reading content standards make, that it does keep some of the reading standards that are important for adults in there that are not in the CCR. So does anyone have anything they want to type in? Any other questions or comments? There's not much time, and this is kind of a one-way communication this time. But if there's anything else you want to briefly go over, I will say that we are thinking of doing a second round of this so that we could do we had some interactive activities that we didn't have a chance to do. So if you would like us to do a sort of part 2, maybe you could type that in to the chat box and let us know, which could perhaps include going through a video together and working through it. And we found that very useful at the Summer Institute. So, Laura, you want to go through this, the goals?
So just to say that, we completed our goals for today. Hopefully by the end of today, you can now identify the key concepts related to the CCR standards for adult ed, identify key elements of the reading standards, specifically the ones that Linda went over and that I went over in terms of the level-specific standards, and then be able to describe how CASAS is aligning to the CCR for adult education. We really appreciate you attending today. Sorry for the technical difficulties. Thank you for being patient and for calling back in. And if we hear from you that you'd like us to do a follow-up, we would be very happy to do that. Thank you so much for attending today.
Thanks, everybody.